LSU has started August with a bang. In fact, a couple of them on the recruiting trail, a couple of new defensive line commitments for the Tigers 2026 class. And we also have some updates on a pair of Louisiana's top uncommitted prospects, at least entering the week. One has made an announcement. One now has a decision date for later on this week. A couple of top standouts from the 337 area code. And so this is Louisiana versus all y'all's Recruit That Boot. He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jarrett Roser, and we'll get into all of that and probably a little bit more as we wrap up. Heading in some off camera, what to expect when you're expecting with Sam Spiegelman, prep work, and transition now into some football. How are we doing, Sam, now that, I think this is our first August conversation on the channel, and, the recruiting continues and the season is now fast approaching as well.
I am you're never going to hear me say this again. I am just so excited for this football season. I'm like in a state of just pure happiness, which I almost say maybe 3 days out of the entire year. But I have just, this week in particular, a lot of schools and teams are back on the field. Unfortunately, I have not been on the field with them, though that would really make me happy. It'd also make me a little bit grumpy because I'd be up early on the road, spilling coffee on my shorts like I always do, driving over speed bumps and whatnot. But football is in the air. Optimism, excitement from a recruiting standpoint. We're seeing some of the top uncommitted players, continue to come off the board or at least inch a little bit closer. It's already, you can feel the stovetop. The spatulas are getting out. It's getting a little bit closer to flip season. So that's exciting. And most importantly, whether you're evaluating talent, just seeing how your top commits are doing, if you're a fan of a team, or dipping into the 2027s or 2028 classes, football is in the air. It's a great time to be alive. It's a great time to be covering this sport, covering recruiting, and I'm getting excited for a fun August and a really exciting fall. I have not been this excited for a football season since last season, I think, and that feels like decades ago.
You talk about some of the excitement and optimism and just the feel of football season in the air for August. LSU, recruiting wise, wasted no time having a meaningful August. They get commitments on the 1st and the 2nd from Darryus McKinley and Deuce Geralds, and we'll talk a little bit about each of them individually. But just coming off of a July where I think LSU was considered one of the more successful recruiting programs throughout the course of July and, had a nice summer. They add a couple more defensive linemen to that increasingly impressive defensive line haul for Kyle Williams, Kevin Peoples, Blake Baker and company. How big was the weekend overall to add 2 more big body guys, Deuce a 4-star, Darryus a 3-star, guys that we've talked about on the show before. How nice of a boost to start the month was that for the Tigers?
Yeah, it's crazy to say, but in August you're basically putting together the final pieces of your 2026 class for the most part, and I think that the way that not only recruitment like DeAnthony Lafayette or even Lamar Brown and Deuce Geralds, you're seeing something that you actually haven't seen in quite some time is Brian Kelly and the LSU Tigers are just a bunch of Mariano Rivera closers out here, closing strong in these very competitive, highly, high grossing amounts of money involved in NIL and some of the best, college football programs in the country battling over some of these recruits. And we're seeing Brian Kelly and the Tigers able to win these really close competitive recruiting battles, whether it's someone like Lamar Brown, where you've been ahead for a while, but Texas A&M has really evened things out, or you're actually playing from behind. With someone like Deuce Geralds, I think LSU made its biggest move in June during the official visit, and it still wasn't enough to put the Tigers in his top 2. But going into the month of August, LSU was continually up and up and up, and they made it from an NIL perspective and from a recruiting standpoint that you could accomplish all your dreams. You could live in Baton Rouge where you grew up. You can kind of fulfill your father's prophecy, who is from Baton Rouge and did not go to LSU. but was recruited by Frank Wilson, of course, like everyone. You're able to do that and accomplish all those dreams. And for LSU to move from third or fourth to first for Deuce, to close on Darryus McKinley, 2 or 3 months ahead of schedule, went out for Lamar Brown, went out for DeAnthony Lafayette, hold on to Big Rich Anderson, who made no visits outside of Baton Rouge since December. Pretty impressive situation for BK, for Blake Baker, for Kevin Peoples, who has kind of been lost in the shuffle here, but has been extraordinarily supportive in his role, and Kyle Williams, who again is in his first year in Baton Rouge, first year as a college defensive line coach. Obviously, we know what he accomplished while he was with the Buffalo Bills in the NFL and what he did in Baton Rouge as a player. But now you're talking about a big opportunity to bring in a bunch of stars to Baton Rouge, that some of them are going to play right away, and some of them represent the future of this Tigers defensive line. And when you get players like Deuce Geralds and Darryus McKinley to complement Lamar Brown and Big Rich Anderson and Trenton Henderson, who I keep forgetting about for some reason, you are looking at a full rotation of starters, rotational players, and eventual starters that should have LSU fans just absolutely ecstatic about their future.
When you praise the Tigers coaches' ability to close some of these, high-profile recruiting processes for some of these top prospects from around the country, you hit on some of what I wanted to get to next, which was just how did this unfold down the stretch for Deuce in particular, where Oregon had been considered a likely leader for him through a lot of the summer. We talked about last week, though, that LSU had continued to push and that there were aspects of playing in Baton Rouge that were really intriguing to Deuce. I hadn't mentioned Frank Wilson earlier in this episode, but he obviously had been a huge piece of the Deuce Geralds recruitment throughout. And then Kyle Williams, I think with everything that happens in this recruiting cycle with regards to the defensive line group, we're all kind of watching and learning on the fly. Okay, we know that background that you mentioned of Kyle Williams as a decorated defensive lineman at LSU, a 13-year, I think it was, pro defensive tackle for the Buffalo Bills, and knowing kind of his pedigree in a lot of ways. But okay, what is he going to bring on the recruiting trail where it's kind of a 24/7, 365 job, and you really have to have a passion for that aspect of the role? Sounds like he's doing really well in that regard as well. Just as you got to the tail end of last week, what were some of the nuggets that you were hearing that enabled you to feel confident flipping your prediction on Friday and saying, you know what, Saturday, it actually looks like it's LSU for Deuce?
Yeah. So after his official visits wrapped up, I would have said Oregon, Ohio State, and Michigan as the 3 Big Ten teams on top with Deuce Geralds, with LSU, again, being a Baton Rouge kid, and Ole Miss, where his father played, being on the back end of that top 5. Oregon and Michigan started to separate, and eventually I had heard from a buddy in Baton Rouge, if I'm being honest, that Oregon was the team to beat, and largely that Oregon had the best NIL offer on the table. And that, in addition to the fact that Dan Lanning is a defensive coach, Taj Lapoy, a former defensive line coach at Alabama, is at Oregon as the DC, and of course Tony Tuioti, who Deuce's dad got to know when he was in the league and through this recruiting process. That plus the lucrative NIL offer had Oregon, and I think I mentioned this on the show, Deuce also not kind of wanted to get out of dad's shadows and go play elsewhere, maybe somewhere besides Ole Miss. But as this continued to linger, all you heard was that LSU was still in this, chipping away. And a big part of that is Kyle Williams, who again played in Baton Rouge, played at LSU. And by the week before the August 2nd decision, I had heard 60-40 Oregon and LSU, which would have represented and did represent a massive boost to LSU stock. They have now passed the Michigans and Ohio States, and basically is a 2-team race. I was told that in the week leading into last Saturday that Oregon still finished with the best NIL offer. This is very similar to Lamar Brown, but with the LSU coaches, guys like Kyle Williams, guys like Austin Thomas, the general manager, kind of compared and contrasted. And something I've heard that Deuce, I know a lot of people in message boards love to rip this up, but Deuce wanted to play in Baton Rouge. Again, he grew up there. So when he says playing in Tiger Stadium is a dream come true, I think if things are equal enough, just like with Lamar Brown, if things are equal enough, I'd like to go play for my home team. So what LSU was able to do with their revamped NIL structure, they did not have the best offer, but they showed him how life in Baton Rouge versus life in Eugene, how it would compare and contrast, how the money that he would be making. Not to mention, Deuce is highly regarded from an NIL evaluation standpoint. He is one of the top players in Georgia. He has a film crew documenting every single move that he makes on Friday nights at Collins Hill High School. And his NIL potential, not to say that Oregon couldn't, but LSU has shown with certain athletes that it can really boost them from a mobility angle, a popularity angle with what they're able to accomplish with NIL. And I think that in tandem with LSU upping its NIL offer, being more competitive, made this an easier decision for Deuce and going back to his hometown and joining what is arguably the best defensive line group in the country.
Segues are great here because I was going to ask you, is this the best defensive line group in the country? And you said right there, I mean, how stout is this group? And I think for me, anytime I look at a recruiting class, I fixate quite a bit on the haul and the trenches. And I think most recruiting classes, you want to have a really strong haul, one side of the ball, the other, if not ideally both. LSU seems like they're putting together a nice group on both sides of the line of scrimmage in this 2026 class. And those type of classes to me look like foundational for national championship contender type classes. How good is this defensive line class in particular when you look around the country?
Yeah, I think that the top four off the top of my head, USC, Alabama, Texas A&M, LSU, and also Texas. That would be my top five in the country, rather. And I think that LSU is standing on what is, in my opinion, the best defensive line group. Again, I think Big Rich Anderson is the top interior defensive lineman in the country. I think that Trenton Henderson is one of the best pure edge defenders in the country. I think that Deuce Geralds is one of the more intriguing, what I will think is maybe more of a rotational sort of defensive lineman, but can play inside, can play outside. Insane quickness and pop explosion where he creates mismatches in the middle, and he's a stout run defender. I don't think that he, brings the same NFL future as someone like a Big Rich Anderson or someone like Lamar, who, like Deuce, is position versatile, can play inside and out. But Lamar has elite testing numbers and athleticism to go along with his size, where Deuce is a little bit shorter, but probably faster, a little bit more explosive at this stage, way more groomed as a pass rusher since he's focused on the defensive side of the ball. And then you have players like Darryus McKinley, who just coming off his best season ever and has continued to get better and better. You compare it to places like USC where they have not Demarion. They got the kid from Dallas. It is Jamarian Richardson. You got Luke Wayful out of New Jersey. You got some studs in Texas A&M with Bryce Perry Wright, who's a 5-star, and Tristan Gibbons. And Alabama. There's some talent on all these defensive lines. So you're nitpicking here. But Big Rich Anderson was the best defensive lineman I saw all of last year. We have talked on this podcast time and time again that Lamar Athlete is a first-round pick on either side of the ball down the road. I love Trenton Henderson's film as a true edge defender, which LSU has really not been able to sign in the more recent history. And then you bolster it with guys like Deuce and Darryus, and I think I said on the show last week, they're kind of overlapping skill sets for sure. And if they're your rotational players, then that is a stout group of rotational defensive linemen that could eventually be, second and third and fourth year starters on what could be a team that's chasing conference and national championships down the road. And to me, that lays out the foundation for the best defensive line group in this country.
The aspect of winning some of these recruiting battles where the NIL offer from LSU isn't necessarily as big as some of the contenders, that you're in the same ballpark, but you're not the top dollar figure associated with these recruiting processes, I think has to be music to a lot of fans' ears. I know for the LSU coaching staff, their mentality with a lot of the NIL dynamic in the new era of recruiting was essentially, we want to make sure that we're finding guys that want to be here, and then we'll figure out what the dollar dynamics look like after that. But it's most important that we find guys that we know are committed to being a part of this program, and that it means something to them to be here, and they aren't just chasing the biggest dollar figure. And so I think kind of the joint dynamics of, okay, the NIL stuff on the LSU side is getting figured out to a point where you're in that ballpark on the guys that you want to be in that ballpark for, but also seeing the level of buy-in from these guys that, okay, I'll take a little bit less, from that pot in this capacity because I know this is the program I want to be a part of. I see the bigger picture, long-term opportunities, and I have a level of confidence and faith in that. That's something that really has stood out to me with certainly Lamar last month, and now with Deuce, as we talk about and break down his recruiting process now, that these are guys that clearly want to be in purple and gold and want to be in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, listen, I can't say it enough times. If and when my son is a D1 athlete, I don't think he will be. If he was, maybe a different sport, maybe tennis or golf. I would say let's go to whoever offers the biggest NIL package, 100%. Having said that, I love what LSU is doing, what Texas is doing. Yeah, they have the backing to make substantial offers, and in some cases, they can overpay. But for the most part, where they're putting their resources, they're investing in not only great players, but like you said, kids who want to play in Baton Rouge, kids that want to go play for the University of Texas in both of these respective states. Like that certainly still exists. And there are certainly kids, like I gave the example of, who would just have their hands out, or maybe not even the kids, but dad or mom or agent has their hands out looking for a payday. I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but I love how schools respond by saying, like, we're not going to recruit that kind of player. We can go find a player that wants to be here. We can maybe pay less or more, but they want to be here. And I think that's it's a unique facet of recruiting, because it's perfectly legal for these kids to put their hands out and ask for this money. So it's up to the schools to figure out a defense to that or an answer to that. And I love what LSU is doing. Again, the majority of their class is from Louisiana. They have gone outside of the state for certain positions like edge or offensive tackle. But they have won those competitive recruitments with kids that either have ties or want to play for the Tigers. And I think that's, some schools around the country have been able to figure it out, like LSU, and some are still in the process of doing that. And I think that's a big adjustment for college football teams across the country, as we now are fully immersed 6 days into the rev sharing era of college football.
Transitioning from some of these LSU 2026 commits to some of Louisiana's top 2026 prospects, Darryus McKinley, obviously from Acadiana, the standout who committed to LSU on Friday, kind of checks both those boxes. And when Darryus announced on Friday, I said, okay, here are some of the top remaining uncommitted prospects around the state, because those are starting to get fewer and farther between as more and more guys announce plans for college before their senior year. And two of the names on that list for me were St. Thomas More quarterback Cole Bergeron and Karen Crow, all everything athlete in every sport and every phase of the game, Chantz Babineaux, two guys that now are in the process of coming off that recruiting board heading into their senior years as well. Chantz announced his commitment to Nicholls State this week. Cole Bergeron has his announcement planned for Thursday. I guess before we get more into detail with Cole, thoughts on Chantz, a guy that we've both watched an awful lot of during the course of his high school career and have enjoyed doing so. Someone that, again, has been everywhere on the field for the Bears, and now will head down to Thibodeau and be a part of that Colonels program at the next level. And someone that I think has a chance to prove himself to be, a bit of a steal for that FCS program, a guy that I think is just a hell of a football player, and now will go down to the Bayou and be able to focus on just football and continue to make some strides in his development.
Yeah, I love this get for Nichols. They do this every single year, and unlike other FCS programs around the country, they've been hit hard with some of the players that they've been able to recruit in this new NIL rev sharing era. We're used to seeing Nichols come away with some real steals in the class, and I just we're not seeing recruiting like that at this point in time. So I love that Chantz Babineaux, who again as a sophomore picked up Power Four offers from college football powerhouses around the country. Obviously his recruitment did not go as expected, from maybe the media angle. But in terms of development, I love this fit. Going to go get coached by Coach Fertitta down there. I think he's going to play offense. I think he's very comfortable playing offense. And I don't think he's really gotten to the point where we know exactly what he's going to do. But I think in Thibodeau, we can try you out at running back, at receiver. We can have you work at safety if you so want. I think that flexibility and less pressure to be the dude right there and be a part of the team, I think that's going to bode well for him. He is so multifaceted as a player. I mean, there's like 5 or 6 different roles that you could find for him between offense, defense, and special teams. And when you put him around good coaches in a good spot like Nichols, I'm excited that, again, maybe we had higher expectations for him than he was ready for, but I'd love to see what he's able to accomplish now at Nichols and potentially after.
All those roles you mentioned are things that he has done during the course of his high school career, as well as playing quarterback as a sophomore. And he was a record-setting receiver for Karen Crow as a freshman, a record-setting quarterback for Karen Crow as a sophomore. Last year, freshman quarterback Carson Gursey kind of allowed Chantz to start to be more versatile around the formation again and not have to shoulder the full-time quarterback duties. And now as Carson gets ready for his sophomore year, I'm really interested to see what type of a senior year Chantz Babineaux can have as he prepares for college. STM quarterback Cole Bergeron, a guy that we've texted an awful lot about. I think we talked a little bit about on the show last week. I think by most accounts at this point, Louisiana's top senior quarterback prospect, and a guy that Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, Colorado had been kind of at the forefront, it's felt like, during the course of this summer. We both put in picks Friday, I believe it was, in favor of Virginia Tech. What is your outlook for the Bergeron announcement and just kind of where his recruiting process is right now with not only the Hokies, but, Buffaloes and Yellow Jackets and anyone else?
Yeah. Credit to you and myself for leading the pack on this recruitment. I think that it's really started to crystallize and come to the surface over the past 2 weeks since we started to really dig in and say, hey, where do you think Cole is going to go? I know that he was a player who was flirting with figuring out not only the best fit, but the timeline to make this decision. You and I both know that STM is poised to make another deep run this fall. And Cole, as you know, and can attest, is not the kind of kid that's going to try to command attention for himself in the middle of trying to get STM to the promised land again. So I think he really wanted to have this decision in place before they kicked off the Jamboree or week 1. And if that was the case, we liked where Virginia Tech was. However, Colorado, their OC, Pat Shermer, really took a liking to Cole over the summer, which gave at least me pause. Cole has a desire to meet with Deion Sanders, and they were trying to get him on campus for an official visit to spend time with Deion and Coach Shermer again. And if that was the case, I don't think that Cole would have been committing in August. I think the team that has and continues to push the hardest into Thursday has been Virginia Tech. Since he worked out for Brent Pry and that Virginia Tech staff, I think he phrased it as they have been all in on me. That has been their guy. They just landed their 2027 quarterback out of Bogart, Georgia last week. So I'm sure that, they said, hey, Cole, we'd love for you to take your spot in this 26 class. And like Colorado, Georgia Tech, which hosted Cole for an official visit, wanted to see a little bit from his senior season. That also would have changed his commitment timeline. I think for now, my choice is pretty locked in on the Hokies. I think it's a mutual fit. Colorado, again, they like Cole and they really wanted to get him on campus in the fall. I think they're going to go in a different direction, trying to flip some guys, much like LSU will try to be doing this fall. And with that said, I have a hard time not believing the Hokies will be the choice on Thursday, though Cole has been very tight-lipped about it ever since he set that date.
Yeah, you mentioned he's someone that going into the season, he's not going to want to draw all the attention toward himself. And similarly, talking about some of the recruiting process, he'll answer the questions and be straightforward and whatnot. But he's not a big, throwing a lot of information out there and trying to stay in the headlines and all those things. I mean, for what is he, 6'3.5", 6'4" quarterback with a big arm and some athleticism, a guy that's played some basketball and all those things. He's about as unassuming and humble and just straightforward of a kid as you could ask for. Just wants to be out there and do his best, do his role for his team, whether that be his high school team now, 7-on-7 teams, or college at the next level. But I know coming out of that trip to Blacksburg, I believe it was late June or early July, I guess it would have had to have been late June, that there was a lot of excitement about the relationship there and the performance that he had put on, getting a chance to go up there and throw and whatnot. And so looking forward to his announcement on Thursday. We think it's going to be Virginia Tech, but he's got some great options there to choose from for sure. And kind of go ahead if you had more to say.
I was going to say, he truly is one of my favorite quarterbacks in this class. He isn't in that blue chip category where he, like a Keyshawn Henderson, who is, not only a fantastic passer, but, one of the best pure athletes in the country. Cole sort of represents the old school quarterback, stand in the pocket, read and deliver. But like you said, he's a big body. He's got a very live arm. He has killed it with just accuracy, calmness, and decision making, I believe, not like during his time at STM and across this offseason. Every time I've seen him, he lacks the long-term, first round difference making potential at the position, but I think you could win a ton of games with Cole Bergeron calling the shots. I think he's a great distributor and game manager with obviously the ability to make most, if not all, throws. And I think if you surround him with talent, which he should have in Blacksburg and, he should have at STM, I think you can win a lot of games and compete for a lot of championships with him. And I think, we're talking about Virginia Tech, but if you were to talk about a higher level school, I think the same still applies. He is a very capable quarterback. I love his demeanor. I love his work ethic. And I've loved every time we've seen him since that jamboree, 3 years ago as an underclassman where he came in. I've always been impressed by Cole, and I'm super excited to see what he does as a senior. I would not be surprised if you and I are having a similar conversation in December after state championships, after saying Cole Bergeron was the MVP for STM. And we're talking about, how good of a passer he's going to be in Blacksburg over the next couple of years.
Good call referencing that sophomore year jamboree where, an older player was injured and he got kind of thrown into the fire against Acadiana over there at Cajun Field and handled the situation very well. I mean, just as poised as you could ask for under those circumstances, being thrown into that situation, and went and took care of his business that night. And my most recent time seeing him, just kind of to bookend some of this too, at LSU camp in June, I thought was the most impressed by him that I'd been in terms of just some of the throws he was making. He was at an event where Colton Nussmeier was kind of the star of the quarterback group and all eyes on him. But Cole put on a heck of a show in his own right. And obviously in that setting, you're working with some of the best receivers from around the region, if not the country, but you're also working against some of the best defensive backs from around the region and around the country. And you're working with receivers where you don't know them. You haven't worked with them necessarily as much before. There's not the chemistry and timing. You're just going out there and, drawing some things up and seeing what happens. And he was very successful that day, as I thought, right there on the heels of Colton Nussmeier as a top quarterback performer. And in this week's Prep Red Zone Louisiana rankings update, he was definitely among those stock risers heading into senior year. Wrapping up with Jace Matthews and just kind of circling back to some LSU stuff. I don't know if there's more update from what we've talked about the last couple of weeks, but a reminder to folks that Jace is set for an August 8th, so Friday, commitment announcement, and LSU, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and Auburn have been in the mix. When we last talked, Auburn had been viewed as, as likely a leader still as anyone. LSU, a school with some level of quiet confidence in that recruiting process, and certainly some good relationships there that we broke down more at length last week. But as we now head into the final couple days for Jace, what is your feeling, and any updates to that, or does it continue to feel like Auburn is probably the team to beat heading into Friday?
Yeah, going into Friday, I still feel good about Auburn. I feel like A&M is the team that has dropped off the most down the stretch. There is still some confidence and curiosity on the LSU side. And as we talked about earlier, they have been closers the last couple of big time recruitments. And, Jace, again, does not live too far from Baton Rouge, about equidistance between the Plains and the Bayou. I'm not ruling out the Tigers right now, although all indications I've gotten is that Auburn is in position to potentially win out for Jace, and they could have Auburn has not had that stretch this offseason where they have just piled up the commitments and the flips and the blue chippers jumping on board. They're really not where they're usually at this time of the year. And I think Jace could be potentially the catalyst to that, potentially sparking them. And I know that they've threw out a lot of new offers. They are circling back on a lot of their longtime targets in and outside the region. Would not be surprised if potentially Auburn is a team that we're talking about as one of the winners of August, and potentially a team to watch with a lot of these top guys in September and October.
The great news for LSU fans is a week ago we were talking about, okay, Oregon is probably still the leader for Deuce Geralds, but LSU has come on strong and is still in the picture. And so that feels like a similar type of conversation right now, at least, on face value, surface value for Jace Matthews, where Auburn is viewed as the team to beat, but LSU is someone to not necessarily rule out yet. Unfortunately, this is a once a week show, so you don't get those day-to-day and hour-to-hour updates as the recruitments unfold down the stretch, but you can certainly follow Sam, and he does keep those updates rolling all day, every day. He had the flipped prediction for Deuce Geralds last Friday heading into a Saturday announcement. And so we'll see how some things in the final 48 hours for Jace Matthews develop. But until next time here, this is Louisiana versus All Y'all's Recruit That Boot. He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jet Roser. Y'all be well, and make sure to keep up with Sam's updates until that next recording.